Hi everyone, I'm Ricardo Gonsalves and welcome to episode 8 of Your Health and Your Wealth, live from my living room. Now, I am wearing a mask. I'll tell you why in just a couple of seconds. If you're watching live on Facebook or on LinkedIn, you can leave a comment below and or a question, and I'll try to get to them during the show. And if you're watching on delay across my social media or listening on Spotify or now Apple Podcasts, thank you very much for tuning in. Later, if you're a landlord or a wannabe landlord, we've got an interview for you, investment property during COVID-19. So that's coming up later. But first, speaking of COVID-19, your health and masks. I'll take it off, but the reason why I've got it on is because we're going to be talking about mask wearing. It's a must in parts of Victoria, and debate is growing about its use elsewhere. So if you are thinking about wearing one, what do you need to know? And for that, I'm joined by my special guest today, social scientist at the University of New South Wales, a senior lecturer there, Dr. Holly Seale. She joins me now live. Dr. Holly, thank you very much for your time.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
It's great that you're here because you do specialise in infectious diseases. So I'm glad you can be with me. And we're not here to talk about the pros and cons, I guess, necessarily, or if you should be wearing a mask. What I want to talk about is if you do decide to wear a mask, or if you have to, depending on where you live in Australia, what do you need to know? So, Dr. Holly, can you start maybe by talking about what a mask actually does?
Yeah, so when we use the word mask, really we're just talking about a face covering, something that is going to protect others around you from potentially droplets coming when you cough or sneeze. And that is really the main purpose of wearing a mask. And depending on the mask that you choose, it may also provide some sort of protection to stopping droplets, you breathing in the droplets yourself.
Okay, so we'll talk about some of those masks in a moment. When should you wear one?
What we know about the transmission of COVID is that it happens more frequently when we are in crowded, more condensed areas, inside, maybe in areas like shopping centres where you are frequenting and you are in contact with people, and we just can't physically distance from each other, and so they would be the best times to be wearing a mask in that situation to stop you catching anything.
Okay, so I think you've got a few examples there of the
I
different
do.
types of masks you can wear. Can you run us through them?
Yeah, look, so again, the words are being used kind of interchangeably in the media, in websites, but it is important that we know that there are a range of different products available. So I'm going to start with the ones that we see mostly are healthcare workers wearing, and these would be called a respirator. So they can be either a P2 or what we can also call an N95 respirator, and they generally look, like this. So this one has got a filter on the front, whereas this is a slightly different shape, and they're quite thick material. They often have a nose band and the cords to tie on. And what we are trying to recommend to members of the public is to keep these ones for people who are occupationally at risk. And that includes definitely our healthcare workers, but it can also include people who are in industry. So small business owners and other people out there who need them to protect them from dust and other particles. And so, yes, you can find these probably at your local hardware store, but we're not encouraging people to rush out and buy these particular type. If you do wear one of these, remember these aren't reusable. These are single type use masks or respirators. So then we kind of drop down to the next level, and this is what we call a face mask or a surgical mask. Again, you would see healthcare workers wearing them. It has the ear bands, the nose tie. And look, you can pick these up from your chemist, and they are part of the recommendations for community members. And then, of course, the other step is the use of cloth masks. I don't have one with me here, but they would be something that is made out of material. And again, the types and shapes and fabrics, are dependent on, where you're buying them from, and the quality can change with those.
Holly, the one I see the most of around are these types
Yeah.
of masks, right? Can you show us how do you put them on and take them off correctly? And obviously, from what I've read, the first step is to wash your hands.
It is. So I have my little packet of hand sanitizer, not particularly selling any type of product here, but this is what I would have in my pocket or my handbag with me, because I know that every time I touch that mask, I'm going to need to wash or sanitize my hands. So I've got my ear pieces on, so I can't necessarily put it on technically, but what the key message is we're trying to avoid touching the front of the mask at any time. So we want to know where the nose band is. And so we would be putting the mask on with the nose band, of course, up, linking it over our ears by using these elastic parts at all time, and trying to really avoid touching the front of the mask if you can. And the same goes with taking it off. Take it off by the side bits. If you do feel the need to move it, to scratch under it, that's human nature, and it's going to happen. It's okay. Again, just grab your hand sanitizer and use that whenever you touch it. What we want to definitely avoid is pulling it down and not, having it, hanging around here or under a chin. Or what I've been seeing people do is actually taking it off and then sneezing and then putting it back on. If you need to sneeze into your mask and then get rid of it and start with a new one.
So let's talk about specifics. You mentioned a great one there about sneezing. So what
Mhm.
happens, say you're using it day to day, you're doing your daily business, you want to have lunch when you're out. What do you do? How do you store it? Do you reuse it after you've had lunch? That sort of thing.
Yeah, so look, again, these types of masks are also single-use products, but we know that there are going to be somewhat shortages, and people may not be able to have one product for every time they need to put one on and take it off. So instead, what we may need to be is just be a little bit reasonable and think about just maybe extending the use. So either trying to use it for longer periods, so you're going to be out at the shops, use it for while you're out of the shops. Then when you get back to your car, then remove it. Or if you feel that you have to take it off and put it back on at a later point, what you want to do, of course, is not touch the front of it, washing your hands, putting the product, either the cloth mask or the surgical mask, into a paper bag. We know that COVID doesn't really sit well with paper, and it's probably better to put it into a plastic bag or a paper bag if you can, rather than just throw it into your backpack or into your handbag, and have it with all of your other phone and wallet and all the rest of it. So that's how we can do it.
Two more questions before I let you
Yeah.
go. First of all, what are the risks associated with wearing a mask, though? Because doesn't it, I guess, give the user a false sense of security because they've got one on?
Look, that was kind of some of the sentiments that came out kind of early on in the pandemic. And really there was that kind of tension between, if I'm suddenly wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, am I going to stop doing all of those other great things that we need the community to do, including hand sanitizing, respiratory etiquette, physical distancing. But what we've seen, and we've actually started to gather some data around this, is that people are actually being really good at observing those other strategies while also using their masks. And for some people, that they are using the mask as a kind of a reminder or a nudge to do all of these things. So no, we don't feel that there is necessarily any issues with wearing it. And we just need to remind each other to start using it more.
Okay, Holly, final question. How do we make masks more culturally, Australian culturally accepted? Because I've heard anecdotal stories of people wanting to wear a mask. They might be at a shopping centre, for example, but they don't want to because of the looks that they might be getting. How do we get
Mm.
around that?
Yeah, look, this is, we've got to acknowledge that mask use in Australia hasn't been common beforehand. This is something that we are all learning about and coming to terms with. And, for people in Melbourne, they've had to do this very quickly, whereas maybe parts of the other, around the rest of Australia, say in Sydney now, we have got a little bit of time, before potentially moving to using masks, where we can now get these conversations happening. So, talk to your friends, talk to your family, say to them, I think this might be a good product to use because I want to keep everybody safe. I don't want to expose my family members to something that is that's being transmitted. So it's about having conversations. It's about understanding why are we using them, and really it's that sense of what we're trying to avoid is going down into those harsher lockdown measures. And if it means wearing a mask, maybe that has to be what it is.
Okay, Dr. Holly Seale, much appreciated. Thank you very
No
much for your
worries.
time and all those tips.
Lovely.
Thank you. You can follow Dr. Holly Seale on Twitter at Holly Seale, Seale. Okay, from your health, let's go to your wealth. And does the economic slowdown caused by the coronavirus pandemic provide a buying opportunity for property investors? But what about the challenges currently posed for landlords? For that and more, I'm joined by Investment Director at Wealthi, Stephanie Davies. Stephanie, thank you very much for joining me.
Hi, Ricardo. Nice to see you this morning.
Hey, let's start with those looking at buying investment properties right now. What would you say to them? Because I guess capital growth isn't going to be as strong as what history may have seen it more recently.
Yeah, great question, Ricardo. Well, we're seeing lots of opportunities in the market Australia-wide where clients are looking for property. But I think COVID has been a really good wake-up call for a lot of people to review their budgets, also review their property portfolios and see exactly what they're doing and have a good, long, hard think about it, and also sort of stress test it, really. Any investments they may have had, they may have been asked for a rent reduction or been looking at liquidating that. It just depends on what their strategy is.
We'll talk about some of those things in a few moments. Where do you see prices going for investment properties?
Look, prices is an interesting one because there's lots of different factors that will affect pricing nationally. One thing that we're seeing is that media originally anticipated drops of 10 and 20%. And then it was really interesting when CoreLogic came out last month and said that national dwelling prices have only actually moved 0.8%. So what is actually happening in the market we found to be quite different and quite contrasting to what's going on in the media and what we're being told. But I think, look, at the end of the day, interest rates are really low. Everyone needs a place to live. And so there'll be various attributes that come out throughout this time that will protect house values nationally.
So, Stephanie, what are the advantages of buying right now if someone decides to do so?
Look, buying right now is going to be different for every single person. So whenever we have a client, there's a lot that we have to take into account before we'll say it might be a good idea for you or it might be better for you to hold off and wait. There's a lot of government incentives out there that can be very advantageous to first home buyers and people getting into the market. The home loan deposit scheme is incredible. There's lots of stimulus going into the market that will really get people ahead at this time, provided that they do have a look at their budgets and know exactly what they can afford and stick within their parameters. So we're seeing lots of opportunities around residual stock, newly completed properties, and potential discounts depending on the circumstances, developers' cash flow. There's lots of factors that will affect it, and it's not necessarily the value of a property being lower. Sometimes it's a matter of a developer needing to move on to another project, or they've already committed the profits of a project elsewhere, so they'll be willing to take a little bit less for a property to get that cash back on their balance sheet.
And I guess ultimately when we talk about investment properties right now, the fundamental thing is that it's a long-term strategy, isn't it?
Always. So typically speaking, we always want to say that an investment is for 7 to 10 years. Every now and again, there'll be different factors that come out, and you might want to pull out of a property earlier or hold on to it for longer. But that 7 to 10 year mark is always the safest bet.
Okay, Stephanie, let's talk about landlords now, right? Should they feel worried about their investment in today's economic environment?
Look, I think that is going to always relate back to the fact that a property is a long-term move. It's not something that you can just have a quick win on and put in your cash and pull it out just as quick. It's not shares, but you can leverage a lot on it. So landlords are being rewarded at the moment with very low interest rates. And I think a lot of landlords have found that they can actually afford to hold on to their property rather than those fire sales. We're not seeing those fire sales or panic sales that we thought we might have seen earlier on in the market. But if landlords have bought right to start with, they would have been focusing on data and buying in high growth areas that were supported by other factors, not just a nice looking property. And all those other factors will help protect it in the long run.
Can we talk about rents? And I think we've had a recent report and study by the guys at Domain. These are just rent prices for houses. They were released earlier this week, and it shows that nationally rent prices for the quarter were down 1.2%. In Melbourne and Brisbane, down by more than 2%. So, Stephanie, how would you say landlords should navigate this weaker rental environment, especially if a tenant asks for a rent reduction?
Yeah, this has been a really interesting topic, and I think I've gone out on a whim and said something that has started a few conversations in the industry. I said earlier throughout COVID that a tenant asking for a rent reduction is a really good opportunity to build rapport with both your tenant and your landlord. The reality is that not every landlord can afford to have their rent halved. But if landlords are fair and reasonable and are willing to have the conversation, then they'll be rewarded with that rapport with both their tenant and property manager. And I think there's some really good strategies around navigating these rent reductions, like meeting the tenant halfway. You might not be able to half your rent, but you can say, look, I understand what you're going through. Make sure you get all the evidence, because a lot of tenants have been pushing the boundaries and asking for reductions when they haven't actually lost their job. So make sure your property manager is getting all the evidence, dotting their I's and crossing their T's, and then also be willing to negotiate and come to the party, but also don't be afraid to ask for something in return. So one of my tenants that asked for a reduction, I said, look, I'm happy to reduce the rent, but will you sign on for a longer lease? So there's other ways that you can negotiate to ensure that both sides are protected and you both feel like you've gotten somewhere.
Two final questions. You mentioned building those relationships, right? With the property manager, what's their role in all of this? And how do you build that relationship with your property manager?
I think a property manager is a really important role in any investment portfolio, and I like to call them asset managers. So you think of them as if they're managing the cash flow on that particular asset. So with that relationship, I think it's important to be really clear and communicate with them from the outset that you had expectations of this property earning X and you want to be empathetic to the tenant, but you also want to make sure that it's in line with what's happening in the market. So I always ask my property managers, what do you think I should do? What is your advice? What else are other landlords doing in the immediate area? And what do you think is reasonable? And then I normally try and find a nice middle ground so that you're really, you're paying for advice, and don't forget to ask for it.
Stephanie, final question. If you as a landlord, you're struggling and you can't afford to repay your mortgage, what can you do?
Well, the banks have just extended their mortgage deferrals for another 6 months till January next year. So that's really good news. So I would be talking to your bank in the first instance, re-looking at your cash flows and your budget, because I know that everyone, when they re-look at their numbers, they can always find little areas in their week or monthly budget and their spending that they can pull back on. So try and find some extra cash amongst what you're doing, and then go to the bank and ask them for help. And again, it's all about communication. Just communicate your situation, try and be fair and reasonable, and you'll always be looked after.
Hey, Stephanie, some great tips there. Thank you so much for your time. I do appreciate it.
Pleasure, Ricardo. Really nice to see you.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Stephanie Davies there from Wealthi, and you can find her on Instagram at stephaniedavies.co. And that is it for the program. Don't forget, if you do seek to make any decisions from this stream, contact a licensed financial advisor before making any financial decision to make sure that that decision is right for you. And Your Health and Your Wealth is all over social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Periscope, and YouTube. An audio version of this show will be posted on Spotify and now on Apple Podcasts later on this evening. Tell your friends about the show, share it, like it if you do like it. I'm Ricardo Gonçalves. I will see you next time.